All right, picture this. It's the early 18th century, right off the western coast of India. The Arabian Sea is absolutely churning, and European merchant ships, well, they're navigating these waters with a very real, very palpable sense of dread. I mean, they are on high alert, constantly scanning the horizon for a fleet that has literally struck terror into the hearts of the world's most powerful trading empires. For decades, just the mere mention of the angry pirates on the Konkan coast was enough to make British, Portuguese, and Dutch captains break out in a cold sweat. So today in this explainer, we're going to dive right into the legendary fear surrounding this maritime force, and we'll unravel a historical narrative that has been, frankly, twisted for over 2 centuries.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this fear, listen to this quote from an 18th century British chronicler named Robert Orme. He wrote, "It was now 50 years that this piratical state had rendered itself formidable to the trading ships of all the European nations in India, and the English East India Company had kept up a marine force at the annual expense of £50,000 to protect their own ships. £50,000 every single year. In the 1700s, that was an absolutely astronomical sum for the East India Company to bleed year after year just to keep their vessels afloat past Angria's domains. This was the dominant British narrative, right? A picture of a massive, lawless pirate state holding global trade hostage. But hold on a second. This brings us to a massive historical crossroad. We really have to stop and ask ourselves, were the Angrias actually pirates? Is this infamous label the undeniable historical reality, or is it just a manufactured geopolitical spin? Because when you look a little closer, that line between lawless predator and sovereign defender gets incredibly blurry, especially when the surviving history was essentially written by the invaders.
If you've ever taken a literature class, you probably know all about the unreliable narrator. Well, in this specific historical context, the English East India Company heavily shaped the surviving narrative. They were the ones labeling the Angrias as plunderers and rogue predators. And why wouldn't they? Because framing a fierce rival as a pirate completely strips them of political legitimacy, doesn't it? It conveniently justifies violent intervention. But the historical reality? The Angrias were actually the sovereign Maratha Admiralty. They were strategic defenders operating a legitimate thalassocracy, which is basically a state whose realms are primarily maritime. They were out there collecting taxes and regulating their own coastal waters exactly like any sovereign nation would do.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern academia is finally untangling this mess. Groundbreaking research by Derek L. Elliott from the London School of Economics exposes how 19th century colonial historians essentially just copied the East India Company's homework without ever questioning it. They took the angry, biased diary entries of frustrated British merchants and codified them as absolute historical fact. Elliott's deep dive into the archives totally rectifies this Eurocentric erasure. It proves that the Angrias were not just randomly preying on ships for the fun of it, they were actively seeking to exercise sovereignty over their own littoral or coastal territory.
To really grasp their absolute legitimacy, we need to look at the official title held by the dynasty's founder, Khan Hoji Angria. He wasn't some rogue buccaneer who just hoisted a black flag one day. No, he was officially appointed as the Sarkhel, the chief admiral in hereditary perpetuity of the Maratha Confederacy's naval forces. He was handed this massive command in 1688 by Emperor Sambhaji as a direct reward for his exemplary military service against the incredibly powerful Mughal Empire. So we're talking about a formalized, state-sanctioned military position within a massive indigenous empire.
And let me tell you, they were incredibly effective at their jobs. Just look at this number, 5. That is the number of major, full-scale military attacks the English East India Company launched against Angria's coastal forts over a 7-year period, and they failed every single time. No way around it, the British suffered heavy casualties and were completely unable to break the Maratha coastal defenses. This wasn't some ragged band of thieves. This was a highly organized, lethal military machine that continuously outmaneuvered a global superpower.
Okay, let's dive into this. The 18th century geopolitical chessboard on the Konkan coast was honestly incredibly complex. It wasn't just the British going up against the Angrias. You had the English East India Company aggressively seeking maritime supremacy. You had the Portuguese, an older European colonial power, desperately trying to protect their established trade routes. You had the cities, who were these formidable Abyssinian seafarers acting as the Mughal Admiralty from their base in Janjira. And right in the mix, you had the Marathas, led by the Angrias, operating as the indigenous sovereign power defending their littoral territory. The key here? The Angrias interacted with all these major powers on absolutely equal terms. We're talking complex political negotiations, ever-changing alliances, and sheer military comparative advantage.
Sendu Dorg Fortress.
If you want physical, undeniable proof of this sophisticated Maratha naval sovereignty, you really don't have to look any further than the sheer stone walls rising straight out of the Arabian Sea. I mean, let's talk about Sindhudurg. The scale of this construction is just jaw-dropping. Let me rapid-fire some of these stats for you. Commissioned in 1664 by the legendary Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, it was engineered by chief architect Hiroji Inderkar. It took 3,000 skilled workers just 3 years to build this massive naval stronghold. It spans a whopping 48 acres across an island just off the coast of Malvan. Its imposing ramparts rise 30 feet into the air and measure 12 feet thick. And actually, these walls weren't just built to repel enemy cannon fire, they were specifically engineered to withstand the relentless crashing waves of the Arabian Sea, century after century.
This fort is an absolute masterclass in strategic defense. Think of it like a giant puzzle designed to break an invading navy. Step 1. The entrance is entirely camouflaged to mislead approaching ships. Step 2. Once inside range, multiple bastions provided a 360-degree line of cannon fire, meaning they could fire on intruders from literally any angle. And step 3, which is perhaps the most amazing feat of medieval engineering here, despite being entirely surrounded by the salty ocean, they engineered hidden freshwater wells. This meant they could sustain their own water supply and easily outlast any prolonged enemy siege. Talk about self-sufficient.
But, Sindhudurg wasn't just some cold, utilitarian military base. It was really the beating cultural and spiritual heart of the Maratha naval forces. The fort housed a rare temple dedicated to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself, right alongside shrines to Hanuman, Bhavani, and Mahadev. These sacred sanctuaries provided immense spiritual strength and a massive morale boost to the warriors stationed there. It just goes to show that this was a society deeply rooted in faith and sovereignty, fiercely protecting their homeland from foreign incursions.
So what does this all mean for us today? Why does it matter? Well, it fundamentally shifts how we view this entire era of history. For way too long, the typical colonial story has framed indigenous powers as merely reacting to European initiatives. But the Angria dynasty and the Maratha Confederacy, they completely reversed that script. They were out there proactively enforcing their borders, collecting their dues, and defending their sovereignty against competing global empires. The massive takeaway here is that they were the primary actors, not just reactors.
The legacy of the Maratha Navy and the Angrias challenges absolutely everything we're typically taught about the age of sail. It really forces us to look at who is holding the pen when history is being written. If a fully sovereign navy, operating out of massive, state-of-the-art island fortresses, can be successfully erased and rebranded globally as mere pirates by their economic rivals, what other historical truths are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for us to dig a little deeper? Keep questioning the narrative.